Donald Trump has made his first public appearance since being wounded in an assassination attempt at the weekend. The former US president strode out at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee with his ear bandaged, and delegates formally confirmed him as their presidential candidate for November's election. Mr. Trump's pick for vice president is 39-year-old Ohio Senator JD Vance. Once a vocal and vicious critic of Donald Trump, he's now a loyal ally.
Young, charismatic and in touch with the real lives of working-class voters. That's the image that JD Vance successfully portrays. At 39, he's half Donald Trump's age, representing a younger generation. He is the embodiment of the American dream. From a poor working-class background in Ohio, he became a Marine, a law graduate from Yale, and later a successful venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. His best-selling book, Hillbilly Elegy, highlights the struggles of white working-class Americans in post-industrial cities, using his own story. He was abandoned by his father as a child, his mother an abusive heroin addict. It was his grandmother who believed in him. Trump will be hoping Vance's appeal to working-class voters will win him the industrial Midwest battleground states. The two have developed a strong rapport, but it wasn't always that way. In 2016, Vance likened him to America's Hitler and said he would never be a Trumper. But he later embraced Trumpism wholeheartedly, and when he ran for the Senate in 2022, the former president endorsed him and appeared with him on the campaign trail. Trump says he likes the way Vance performs in the media, where he's an outspoken defender of the former president. Vance believes Trump's 2020 election defeat to Joe Biden was not fairly decided and Trump unfairly vilified.
They said, well, wasn't January 6th the constitutional crisis? And I shook my head and I said, no. January the 6th, Donald Trump trying to challenge an election through constitutional means, that is the opposite of a constitutional crisis.
The two agree on trade, immigration and foreign policy. On Ukraine, they want Europe to do more.
The best way to help Ukraine, I think, from a European perspective, is for Europe to become more self-sufficient. Vladimir Putin is, of course, in the geopolitical backyard of Europe. The United States, as it focuses more on East Asia, simply can't be expected to foot a disproportionate share of the burden.
Following his meteoric rise, JD Vance is now hoping to become America's next vice president.
DW's Washington bureau chief Ines Pohl is at the convention in Milwaukee. She told me more about Senator Vance.
Yeah, he kind of amplifies the take of President Trump himself. He doesn't say anything different from him, maybe just sometimes in a little bit of a harder tone. We just heard him talking at the Munich Security Conference in February, where he said that Europe has to kind of shoulder more of the burden that, of course, Ukraine, Russia is so close to other European countries. And JD Vance is convinced that the United States should rather focus on being ready to defend themselves against the increasingly aggressive China. So he basically says what Trump has been saying since he was the president here in the United States. So this is not really new, but again, he just amplifies Donald Trump's geopolitical policies, which also is America first.
That's our Washington bureau chief, Ines Pohl. Now, Rachel Rizzo is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Centre. Her research focuses on European security, NATO and the transatlantic relationship. Welcome to DW. How should NATO and European institutions and national leaders prepare for a potential Trump-Vance White House?
So I think they should be preparing for a potential Trump-Vance White House in the same way that they should prepare for a Democrat to be in office, which is spending more on defense and shouldering more of Europe's continental security on their own shoulders. Although Trump and J.D. Vance will be much harsher on this point than perhaps a second Biden term, J.D. Vance has said that Europeans are not carrying their fair share of the burden, especially when it comes to the provision of weapons. He says they're deindustrializing their own economies, especially in Germany, deindustrializing in the name of a ridiculous green energy policy, as he calls it. So if Trump gets reelected with JD Vance on the ticket, I think Europeans can expect continued harsh rhetoric and some serious pressure from the White House that they haven't experienced for the last 4 years.
You've written that NATO needs to be Europeanized. If that's the case, who do you think in Europe could lead that change?
Well, that's why we have found ourselves in the place that we are today, where the United States has shouldered, I think, an outsized portion of Europe's continental security for 30 plus years now, which has really stymied Europeans' abilities to create a scenario where there are European industrial defense leaders. And we still find ourselves there today. I mean, Germany, as the 4th largest economy in the world, the economic powerhouse of engines, certainly has a role to play here. France certainly has a role to play here, but so do, I think, Poland and the Baltic states that are on the front lines facing down Vladimir Putin and have really stepped up their own defense spending over the last few years. So I think there are some questions left on the table as to who would play that leadership role. Certainly different countries would be vying for it if it was actually on the table, which I'm not 100% sure that it is quite yet.
OK, I appreciate that we are speculating. Do you see any downside for the United States if a Trump-led US turns its back on Europe with its messy wars and fractious neighbours?
Well, here's the thing. I don't think necessarily the right term is the United States turning its back on Europe. I think that there are some principles that guide Trump and JD Vance's thinking on foreign policy. They have the American middle class at the center of mind. They view China and the Indo-Pacific theater as the primary geopolitical challenge of our time. And that's where most of their focus, I think, will certainly be. But I do think that given past remarks from Trump, he has said that he won't pull out from NATO. He understands the value in it as long as Europeans pay their fair share. What I am a little bit worried about is what a Trump-Vance presidency or administration might mean for U.S. support for Ukraine. And that, I think, could potentially be on the chopping block.
When Trump was last president, he made a big song and dance about Europeans paying their fair share to stay in the NATO club. How much heed was paid by European leaders then? And did they all sort of breathe a sigh of relief when Biden was elected?
Certainly, they breathed a sigh of relief because Biden's campaign message to our allies and especially the Europeans was that America is back. But certainly when you look at NATO allies over the last 4 years of Biden's presidency, I think there were 9 NATO allies when Biden came into office that were spending the required 2% of GDP on defense. There are now 23 of the 32 NATO allies spending the required 2% of GDP on defense. That's a huge jump. And that means that NATO and Europeans have a very good story to tell should Trump be elected. Of course, that number should be at 32, but those numbers are still increasing. So what I tell Europeans when I talk to them all the time is make sure to tell that story so that Trump and his team really understand the value of NATO as an alliance and the transatlantic relationship more broadly, because it does underpin many other relationships across the globe.
That's very clear. Thank you so much, Rachel Rizzo from the Atlantic Council's Europe Centre. Well, a second Trump presidency was also on the minds of European lawmakers as the newly elected European Parliament met for its first session. DW's Brussels bureau chief, Alexandra von Nahmen, sent us this update from Strasbourg.
Many Europeans have already been anxious about a potential second Trump presidency. The nomination of JD Vance as Trump's running mate has raised further concerns, with some lawmakers pointing to his vocal opposition to the US aid for Ukraine and others describing him as more isolationist than Trump.
Senator Vance has made his position clear when it comes to the crucial transatlantic relations. I'll just give you 3 examples. First one, he is firmly opposed against further US support for Ukraine in its fight against the Russian invasion. Secondly, he is in favor of additional tariffs on imports from Europe. And thirdly, he has criticized Europe being over-dependent on the United States when it comes to military security.
As far as Europe is concerned, the result of this will be more pressure. And they will do the usual tactic, like saying, you don't pay, but still you have a war, you haven't resolved this, and yet, you have to do things. So it will be a situation where this parliament will be really very often accused of not having taken on their responsibility.
It will go in the direction Trump wants it to, namely radical. That's worrying not only for the US, but also for Europe. We don't have any influence on it. We have to wait and see what happens.
Visiting Germany earlier this year, Vance criticized Europe for relying too much on US protection. He said he didn't want the US to pull out of NATO, but to focus more on East Asia. Some Europeans expect him to support a hawkish China policy and to push Europe further on a controversial path with Beijing. Others, however, have warned against jumping to conclusions, with some stressing that the US election is far from over.
Now, Julius van der Laar is a political strategist and communications expert who worked on Obama's 2008 and 2012 campaigns. He joins us from Milwaukee. Welcome back, Julius. We saw Donald Trump's grand entrance at the convention last night after narrowly escaping that assassination attempt. What did you make of his appearance, the staging and the reception that he got?
I mean, it was a grand entrance. He walked right behind us here on the stage and got into the family box. And of course, it was standing ovations. It was very emotional. But in the end, this convention is an entire branding exercise. This is a branding exercise in order to, of course, paint a picture of Donald Trump right now, rebranding him as the uniter-in-chief. And of course, Democrats will have to be focused on making sure that that branding is not going to be building any speed and momentum and actually pushing through in order to make the stark contrast between Donald Trump and the Democrats.
And when we look at the disunity and chaos of the Republicans in Congress, the party does now appear to be falling into line. Well, is it, or is that just convention razzmatazz for the cameras?
Oh, absolutely. The party is 100% in line. One of the starkest critics of Donald Trump, Nikki Haley, who was a fierce critic of Donald Trump's back in January and February during the caucuses and the primaries in New Hampshire, is scheduled to speak tonight. And she will, of course, say that she is falling in line, that Donald Trump is the only one who can make the world safe again, and that she is 100% supportive of Donald Trump. The same, of course, goes true for Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, who's scheduled to speak here as well. So I think the party has heard the shot. They know, of course, who Donald Trump is and that he is the power center of the Republican Party. So they're going to be in full support of their nominee.
And what have you been hearing from Republicans and indeed from Democrats about the choice of JD Vance as Donald Trump's running mate?
All right. I mean, yesterday, JD Vance was announced, and it took a few minutes for Democrats and the Joe Biden campaign to send out text messages and emails, of course, branding JD Vance as a radical, as an extremist. And I think there is reason to look and examine his record on the things that he has said in the past. Of course, he is a hardliner on many issues. Of course, when we look at it from a European perspective, the things he said about Ukraine and that he's not willing to support the effort in order to protect Ukraine after all, that is one of the issues. But abortion, many other social issues, that is something where JD Vance has taken a very conservative position, and the Democrats are trying to exactly put a laser focus on that as they try to mobilize their base.
Yeah, Kamala Harris says she's ready to debate Senator Vance. How much impact would a Vance-Harris matchup have on either campaign?
I mean, I think it's going to be good TV for about the 90 minutes they're going to be on stage. Both are incredibly well-equipped rhetoricians. JD Vance, incredibly adept communicator. Same, of course, is true for the former prosecutor, Kamala Harris, who is able to craft an argument. But again, if you look at the past, VP presidential or vice presidential debates have hardly had any impact. This time, however, it could be different in the sense that we, of course, have two very old candidates, and a tremendous focus is being put on those two young or youngish candidates as they are very likely to take over throughout the term, that next serving term of the next U.S. president.
Just picking up on that point, how much should we care about who is in the running for a job that was once famously described as not worth a bucket of spit?
I mean, worth a bucket of spit is exactly right. It's the job that actually hardly anyone wants in Washington. But I think we should pay very close attention, especially from a European perspective, because the contrast couldn't be any starker between Kamala Harris, who has, of course, supported Joe Biden in his effort to, of course, support Ukraine, and JD Vance, who has made it very clear that under his command, or at least as vice president under Donald Trump, he would not be in favor of any more Ukraine help. So I think it has a tremendous impact for us here in Germany or throughout Europe. But frankly speaking, the contrast is very stark between the two.
The Biden campaign stopped campaigning after the Trump shooting. They cancelled events and suspended campaign ads. What's the plan now, especially since they were trying to get more aggressive?
Right. I think it was the right thing to do, to cancel the TV ads, to stop online advertising right after the assassination attempt of the former president. But now they got to pick back up. This week is probably not the best moment because the entire media attention is focused on the Republican convention. But sooner or later, they will have to go back on the offense to try to get out their message. But first, they got to find that message. And up to this point, Joe Biden just has not been an effective messenger. He's not able to carry out the message, and I think there is a message for him to deliver. He could make the case that he can say, well, who's actually fighting for you? Is it Donald Trump or is it Joe Biden? So that message we haven't heard yet, and again, I'm not convinced that Joe Biden is the most effective messenger the Democratic Party has to offer.
But even if he has a message and he has an effective message, there is all this speculation swirling about whether Joe Biden, the messenger, will actually be the man who ends up contesting the election against Trump.
That's right. That speculation continues, and unless he's able to tamp down that speculation, and again, it's still almost a month till the Democratic convention in Chicago. Unless he's able to tamp down that convention, nobody's going to be able to listen to the things he actually has to offer with regard to his positions or his general message.
And a word then, final word about the money, the big money that's been swirling around. The Wall Street Journal reporting that Elon Musk plans to give $45 million a month to a pro-Trump PAC. What sort of difference could that sort of money make?
I mean, $45 million a month, the commitment from Elon Musk, of course, that makes a difference. However, I don't think it makes as much of a difference as it used to in the past. Why? This campaign is scheduled to cost approximately $16 billion. So I think there is at some point an overflow. You don't actually know what to do with the whole money anymore. So right now I think the focus is on Donald Trump has his media channels. The Biden campaign has their media channels. There's only so much advertising you can buy. And even if the Biden campaign were able to find big donors in the likes of Elon Musk, first you got to have a message before you can actually use the advertising dollars to put that message out. And right now that message is just missing.
Good talking to you as ever. Julius van der Laar, a political strategist. Thank you so much.